Hey everybody, so here as promised is going to be our croissant video. I've already scaled out the ingredients. I'm just going to mix it up and continue from there. Okay, so this is our croissant dough. That's a kilogram of all-purpose flour. And this is actually a fairly small recipe. It only makes about 20 croissants. It's hard to do laminated dough with a really small recipe. That's 90 grams of sugar, 25 grams of salt, and 15 grams of yeast. And again, we always want to make sure we mix the flour with the yeast and the salt and the sugar so that when the liquid gets added to the dry ingredients, the yeast isn't in complete contact with either salt or sugar, because either of those things can kill the yeast. All right, now this, we're just going to stir in 220 milliliters of milk, or 220 grams of milk, 440 milliliters of cool water, or 440 grams of cool water. Now with a lot of bread doughs, we knead the dough a lot. With croissant dough, it wants to be what's called a shaggy dough, which means we don't want to knead it to make it smooth or develop gluten, because we want our croissants to be crispy, not chewy. That's why we don't want to develop gluten. So all we want to do is to get these ingredients combined into a shaggy dough. Okay, so I've just stirred that, kneaded a few times, and that's what we would call a shaggy dough. Now, croissant dough, because we used cool liquid, is not going to ferment very much. So it's going to actually just sit in the fridge. It wants 6 or 8 hours in the fridge. So we're going to wrap that up, stick it in the fridge, and make croissants out of it in 6 or 8 hours. There you go. You know, croissants have butter folded into them. That's what makes it a laminated dough. The layers of butter and pastry. And we've done this in the class before, where I say I want a block of butter that's a couple centimeters tall and maybe a square shape, and sometimes people get confused by that, but basically we just want a piece of butter that we can fold into the dough. So it just has to be flat and kind of square. And then all we're going to do is stick this in the fridge, and then tomorrow when we need to use it, we'll have to pound it out a little bit, and that'll help soften it so we can roll it into the croissants. All right, here we are, day 2. So there's our butter block, which is pretty firm because it's been in the fridge. So it's actually too hard to put into the croissants right now. And so you guys have all seen me, and maybe some of you have done this, whacked the butter with the rolling pin. And just the act of doing that warms the butter up a little bit and makes it more plasticky, as opposed to brittle, which is how it is now. So we'll do that in a few moments. But here we have our croissants, the croissant dough that we made yesterday, which has been sitting in the fridge overnight. So we're going to roll this into a rectangle, always with the rectangles. So if we start with something that looks something like a rectangle, we'll probably end up with something that looks something like a rectangle. So this is sometimes called docking. We're just pressing the dough out into a shape to start with. And as you mostly know, I prefer a French rolling pin. That's a pin that has no handles and no axle running through it, because I can get a bunch more weight on it. All right, so there's a nice piece of dough. Unfortunately, we don't have the sheeter here. That would be great. Now, the butter. Okay. Brought the dog running. And hopefully we're going to end up with, I should have made that a bit bigger. There we go. Okay, so there we go. So that's now dough, butter, and dough. Now by the time we're finished rolling and folding this, we're gonna have dough, butter, dough, butter, dough, butter, dough, butter, dough, butter, dough, about 800 times. It's not quite as many as with when we make puff pastry. Puff pastry, we have an extra fold. It's over almost 1,000 layers, which is where the name mille-feuille comes from. That's the dessert that is also called a Napoleon. So here we go. One of the questions on my Red Seal exam for being a pâtissier was to calculate the layers. And I did it that one time. I've never done it again. But maybe we'll do it this time. So right now, someone's gonna have to be good at math. We have dough, butter, dough. And then I believe it's exponential. So if we have dough, butter, dough, and then dough, butter, dough, and then dough, butter, dough, it's times 3, right? And that fold is a single fold, right? Looks like a letter. That's a single fold. I always do a single fold first because it's not as neat or tidy a fold. I prefer the double folds because they're neater and tidier. And again, we talked about this with the biscuits. We don't want a lot of waste. Sorry, that's the dog. You see the dog there coughing on his own water. Hi, Farley. You say, hi, Farley. Hi, Farley. Farley doesn't talk much, but he hacks most inappropriately at times. So we're gonna roll out this nice, again, rectangle. And so now we have 3 layers because the dough will stick to itself, right? So it's just 3 layers. And then we're gonna do 2 double folds. Which is gonna make 4 more layers. So the double fold is this one. Bring it up here, bring it to here, and then we fold it in half. So, right, it's like a book. That's a double fold. So now we've done a single fold and a double fold. At this point, it could rest in the fridge, and I think we're going to do that because it's getting difficult to roll. And so in a production situation where someone else might come along and take over my work, I would want to mark on my dough a little happy face, a little 1 to denote that I've done a single roll, and then a 2 that I've done a double roll. I don't use a lot of plastic wrap at home. I try to stay with things that will break down in the end, you know. So that's just going to sit for a little while, and we'll come back later and finish it up. Thanks. Okay, so here's our dough. It's rested. And now we can roll it out again. So I've been busy calculating layers. And we do a single fold, which is also called a trifold, or a letter fold. And then 2 book folds or double folds. And that gives us 144 layers just in the dough. And then when we roll the croissants up, then you have hundreds and hundreds of layers. So the dough itself only has about 150 layers if you're going to do that way. If you're going to do, sometimes people do just single folds, and then I think you get around 81 layers. But this is basically all we do. We're just rolling. I'll come back when I'm ready. That's about as big as I'm going to get that by hand. It's starting to act kind of rubbery, so that means we've stretched the gluten kind of as much as we can. So we're going to do another one of these double folds. And we want to brush the flour off. Because we do want the dough to stick together. Okay, so there's our second double fold. So again, we mark this 1 and 2 and 2, and that now is 144 layers of dough and butter. And now we're gonna put it in the fridge again and rest it for a while. And when we come back, we'll roll it out. Maybe I'll roll it out ahead of time and cut it and shape it into croissants. Okay? This is why I have trouble getting work done, because this sits between me and the computer all the time. This is Pellet. You can see he lies directly on the keyboard. Off to do croissants now. Okay, so I've been rolling this out and sort of cycling it in and out of the fridge, because if the butter melts, then we won't have those cool layers that you get in croissants. So again, here we go. This is a laminated dough. Laminated means there's lots and lots of layers. We're going to make croissants. And so in order to make the croissants, we have to cut the dough. So we cut it, we fold it in half. Now, normally what we do is we try to measure these. So that's about 2.5 inches wide, that knife blade. Okay, so that's going to be the top of my croissant, and that's the bottom. So I'm going to do that. Use my knife blade to gauge the width of the croissant, and then just draw a little line to the bottom. And if you want to make pain au chocolat, which is a chocolate croissant, we would cut these in a rectangle. Let's do another croissant on the end. Okay, so we cut. We have to open them up, otherwise sometimes they'll stick together. Okay, so we have lots of croissants. These little scrappy bits at the end. When you're in a real bakery, things have to weigh a certain amount. If you're going to say you're going to sell your croissants, they have to be 100 grams. Use these little scraps just to make sure they're all the same weight. We just we just cut them up and use them. So I'm going to continue cutting, and then we'll come back to shaping. Okay, so shaping croissants, we have the croissant. The little wedge we cut, we want to stretch it a little bit. Pull it this way. Pull it this way. I say it makes it look like a little pair of underpants. And then you put a little blob of the extra dough, and we roll it up. And one of the important things is that this little nose has to sit just directly in front of the croissant. It can't be underneath the croissant. Otherwise it's like trying to stand up with someone pulling down on your neck. You want the croissant to be able to rise and get nice and flaky. And the only way it can do that is if it doesn't have any stress holding it down. Rolling and placing on the sheet pan. It's my ridiculously tiny sheet pans because I've got a ridiculously tiny oven here at home. This is going to take all day getting these baked off. So pan of chocolat, you want to do those. We're going to take some chocolate. It doesn't have to be in a line. And just roll it so that there's some chocolate in the middle. And that'll sit in that way. Same thing, because it needs to puff up. Okay, so there's croissants. There's pain au chocolat. Those are a laminated dough. Laminated doughs, lots and lots of layers. We fold the biscuits, so they've got some layers. Croissants, we fold several times, so they have, what do we say? 144 layers in these, and then rolled all up. You know, there's 3 or 4 layers there, so you've got 600 layers at some point, something like that. With croissant dough, not croissant dough, that's the croissant dough. With puff pastry, we fold 1 extra time, which would give you 4 times 144. Where's 20, 200? So 600, 700, 800 layers in puff pastry. That's the ones we make the little breakfast pastries out of. So there you go, there's some laminated doughs. So now you know what a laminated dough is. Butter, flour, or butter dough, lots and lots of times. And I'm gonna spend the rest of the day baking croissants and delivering them to my poor unfortunate neighbors who will have to be eating croissants. And our next, anyway, so I'll post this, and I'll post a worksheet to go with it. And so the worksheet is just to go through the process. Use Google, use whatever you want to research the questions, be familiar with the process, and at the end there'll be we'll do a little bit of a quiz once we're finished this kind of yeast dough area, okay? All right, talk to you soon, bye. So just a little addendum to our croissant video. Look at those layers, very nice. Listen. Oh, delicious. Okay, so beautiful layers, nice croissant. Well done.